Now that you have a better idea about how to become your future self, and hopefully you've set some goals, you've set some habits, I wanted to introduce my next guest, who was introduced by one of my clients, Kirsten from Intertwined SEO. Thank you for that introduction. Brea, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us about you and a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, Maria, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. And again, thank you to Kirsten. Um, my name is Brea Woodson. I'm with GRT Marketing. And basically, in a nutshell, what I do is I teach businesses or people who promote themselves within their business how to market themselves. So I kind of go that gap of people who are not quite ready to hire out marketing, or maybe not all of their marketing, just to get that really good solid understanding of how marketing all works. So I teach them how to do it in very bite-sized practical ways.
And I think this book, so thank you for recommending it because it's a very good fit to anybody that's in marketing, but also anybody that's in business or professional, with the sense that when you are in marketing, there is an image that you want to portray out there. And there is something that either you want your brand or yourself to aspire to be. And in order to do that, you have to have a plan, which is essentially what you help people with, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we all need some sort of path to know where we're going. So it all kind of fits together. Yeah, so I love it. I love Benjamin Hardy in general. His background is in psychology, which I love. I actually have a minor in psychology, so it really resonates with me. But yes, with marketing, with life, I mean, just the ability and taking the time to look into the future and then work towards that is so important.
Which takes me to my first question when you mentioned, you have to have a plan, you have to have some sort of map of how you're getting there. And visualizing your future self can be quite theoretical often, but how can people put that into practice and maybe write down some steps, come up with a plan? Like, what can they do in order to make that a little bit more tangible so that they can really see their future self and the steps that they're going to take in order to get there?
For me, I think what made this so practical within the book is he has you go through a couple exercises, and I think it's just so useful. The first one is looking backward, and the next one is looking forward. So if I'm looking backwards 10 years ago, so myself 10 years ago, and think about where you were in that point in time, it really gives context in terms of like how much you change in 10 years. So for me, I had a toddler. I had just lost my mom. My mindset was very, very different than what it is today. And then I can see where I am today, but then I think of myself, okay, 10 years from now, okay, I have a daughter who's 13, she's going to be 23, and I'm going to have a 19-year-old. And you think about, well, where are they going to be? And it very quickly makes you understand, and it can help you visualize exactly what life could or could not look like in those times of periods. So to me, anchoring it on ages and stages of your own personal life helps a lot in terms of visualizing. So 10 years, I mean, who knows? I mean, it's so like out there, right? But to be able to anchor it to something or somebody within your household or things that you might be doing in that time frame helps me visualize a lot.
Yeah, and it can be as simple as like right now, for example, I just celebrated 2 years of the coaching network. And if somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, where will you be in 5 or 10 years?" I could say, "Okay, that'll be 7 years into the business, or 12 years into the business." And you anchor it to something, and then you start to see, okay, where's my business now? Where has it been? Where was it 2 years ago when I started? When was it when it was just a concept? Like, what was it before that? And who was I before I even started this process? And I really like that part of the book because it links back to coaching quite a bit. When somebody comes into a coaching session and we're having a discussion and we're talking about a problem or something that they're struggling with right now, one of the first questions that I ask is, have you dealt with something like this before? Because that recollection and looking back and saying, actually, yes, I have, and yes, I went through it and I worked through it, and this is where I am now, can I apply some of those principles? So it's the same, where was I 10 years ago? Where am I now? Where do I want to be in the future? What changes need to be made? And changes are easier said than done, right? Everybody wants to change some little bad habits that they have. They want to be a better person and they want to implement some better habits, but obviously it takes a lot of effort. And something like that, when you fall off the wagon, it can be discouraging. So, what steps can people take in order to implement some habits, get rid of some old habits that will help them become their future self? And how can they stay encouraged and motivated when, they sidestep, or maybe it's not working as fast as they think it should?
Always a challenge, right? um, a visual I really like from Dr. Hardy is when he references, and honestly, I don't remember if it's actually from this book or something else that he's talked about, but Stephen Covey's reference to the big stones versus little versus the pebbles. So when you're approaching life and work, business ownership specifically, and really each day creating habits, the habit of doing the most important revenue producing things first versus checking emails, all the things that need to be done, but really to focus and making the goal and the daily habit being the thing that really matters most. So if I see myself in 10 years, are the top 3 things I'm doing today going to get me there? And maybe even more important, if my future self is XYZ, is what I'm saying yes to today going to get me there? I think that was a really important part for me in the book and really hit, which is sometimes we're saying yes a lot to things that don't aren't going to get us to where we want to be. So if it's really that important to you to have this life in 10 years that you've deemed that you want, is saying yes to the things that you're being proposed with today going to get you there? And if not, you have to say no, and that's hard. But I think those go back to the habits and the decisions and going off or on, whether you're getting them done and being consistent. Also, I think just having grace and knowing that if you don't get those big stones in today, that it doesn't have to be, you're not getting the big stones in for the next 6 months. Yesterday happened. It's okay. We're getting back on track. So yeah, I think being consistent, doing the habits, but also being kind to yourself is so important.
And it's so important right now when everybody's reevaluating, hey, how did 2024 go? How do I want 2025 to go? And I was actually on a walk with my wife and we were having a conversation, and there was this goal that I want to achieve. And I was like, it's so scary. Going back to that, I can't remember the other author, but the big audacious hairy goals, or PAGs, or something like that. And he talks about, if a goal doesn't scare you, then is it really a goal worth going for? Because you're just staying in that comfort zone. And so I was talking to my wife and she said, well, think about how you would feel in 6 months time, even just 6 months time. If you start today, if you start working towards that goal today, how would you feel in 6 months time? That if you don't start today, and then you think about that same goal and you thought, I could have started 6 months ago. And it's that realization that, hey, it doesn't matter how big or how small I start, just start taking those steps, start stretching that level of comfort and start working towards those goals. And like you mentioned, working on those bigger pebbles, those bigger stones that have the bigger impact, will help you stay motivated. With that in mind, as you've already started to set your goals, started to set your habits that you want to work on, how often should you analyze, hey, is this taking me where I want to be? Is this actually is where I want to be still the same that I thought when I started this process? How often should you reevaluate those goals and those habits?
That's, I think, a tricky question. I think, first of all, going back to your wife's advice, I think that's so important because really, at the end of the day, anybody who's gone through life, I mean, that's the biggest regret, right? Not starting earlier. So whatever it is, whatever you see your future self being, start today. Whatever those small steps are, so wise. But I think it really depends, because when we talk about being your future self now, I mean, that could be you picturing yourself in 6 months, 1 year, 5 year, 10 years. So to me, if it's 10 years out, that might be a yearly check-in. So maybe it's, okay, I'm going to write a letter to myself and I'm going to schedule it out so I can see exactly what I think I might be in 10 years. But maybe in a year I'll look at the letter and see how much of it came true, or maybe my priorities have changed now. Because the trickiest part about future self is you don't know who that person's going to be exactly, because you haven't had the experiences yet to determine who it's going to be. So just putting yourself on the path to have those experiences could put you on a different path completely. And that's okay. And it could be a better path, a much better path. So check-ins are important for sure. So if it's if it's a 6 month future self, maybe you don't need to check in until the 6 months. But if it's a 10 year, I would say at least annually to check in.
And I like that you said, you don't know if that's the person you're going to become. You also don't know the experiences that you're going to be going through. And I always tell my clients, just because you made a decision today doesn't mean you can't change it tomorrow or even within an hour if new information surfaces. Because that's what a lot of people fear. They said, I made this decision. If I get new information and I change my mind, does that make me indecisive? Am I not going to be able to stick with what I said I was going to do? And the question is, would you have made the same decision with the new information that you have now? And if the answer is no, then change your decision, change what you're doing, because you have new information, you have new experiences, you have new things. And again, like you mentioned, the person that you are now is going to put you into certain circumstances, is going to give you certain experiences. But if you start acting like your future self, that's going to put you into a different path with different experiences, meeting different people, and getting different opportunities. So surely if you have access to different opportunities, why wouldn't you change your goal? Why wouldn't you adapt it and learn from yourself, learn from what you're doing in order to become that future self? As you're doing these things to become a better you, imposter syndrome is a huge thing for people when they are, going into a new market, learning new things, into a new job, whatever that might be. And I personally experience it all the time, and I have to ground myself. And, you're in this job for a reason. You have this experience. This is what you do. This is what people are asking for. But when you are trying to emulate your future self and you're doing things out of your comfort zone, it might be harder to ground yourself and say, no, this is who I want to become. So let me get away from this imposter syndrome if that's not who I am, but this is who I want to become. What are things that people can do to stay on that path and try and battle that imposter syndrome a little bit?
Yeah, so normal, right? We all think we're the only ones that go through that, but you talk to more and more entrepreneurs, business owners, everybody goes through that. I think something that Dr. Hardy talks about is, again, going back, like when you're going back to the discussion of when you're looking backwards 10 years or forwards 10 years. And yes, it's you, but it's really a different person. So I think looking at it through that lens and giving yourself grace and almost seeing yourself and treating yourself as a different person can really help with imposter syndrome. For example, if you have a friend going through the same path, so let's pretend my path is actually a friend telling me it's her path, you're going to talk to her in a very compassionate, loving, encouraging way. And so thinking of yourself in the same way, and especially when you're writing those letters to yourself from your future self, I mean, really talking to yourself in a way that is encouraging, positive, like, hey, you're doing great. You're exactly where you need to be. You're on the path. You're doing steps XYZ and you're going to get here. I'm proud of you. And so just saying and thinking of it through that lens, I think is helpful. Like, yes, you know what the hell you're doing and you're doing great. And you are doing it because you're smart and you have the background and you can help people. So I think for me, it's just almost being in third person because it's so easy for us to beat ourselves up and doubt ourselves. So yeah, to me, that's super important. And I think it also goes back to, when you alluded to it. So when you're have the vision of where you're going, another thing that he talks about is going from thinking to feeling to knowing. So even though it might feel like imposter syndrome, like I'm kind of like pretending to be this future self, but I know I'm not. It's really just a natural path going from, okay, I'm thinking about myself in 10 years, and now I'm putting myself in situations to get me there. And in putting myself in that path and situations to get me there, I'm starting to now feel like that person, which then leads to the final one of knowing, yes, this is actually me. This is me. And then the next thing you know, 10 years are up, because we all know 10 years go really fast. And you look up and you're like, holy shit, I'm here. Like, this is it. I know this is me now. And then you look back and you think, how did I not see that the whole time? So I think it's just having compassion and, again, kindness towards ourselves.
It's so much easier to be kind to other people than it is to ourselves.
That's exactly right. So pretend you're not you. I don't know.
And I like what you mentioned, which was kind of a better version of fake it till you make it, because you are striving to be your future self. So you're not really faking it. You're taking these steps, you're doing these habits, you are striving to be this better self, this better person, or this different person than who you are now. So why would that be fake? Why would that make you feel like an imposter? Because you are actually taking those steps to do it. So one way to stay motivated would be to look at those steps and be like, no, actually, I am doing what I said I was going to do, and I am becoming the person that I want to be. And I hate to always cut these shorts because I'm sure we could have a long conversation on everything in this book. One last question for you before I wrap it up would be, how did this book come to your lap, or did somebody recommend it? Did you find it, and what made you read it, and did you get any impact from it?
Um, Boy, that's a great question. I think I maybe originally heard him on a podcast, is my guess. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm going to be real honest. I don't completely remember. He also did a book that is, he's done a lot of books. But 10X is easier than 2X is another big one. So I read them kind of back to back. And again, I think just with that psychology background, it really, in the organizational psychology, which really is all about, it jumps into this entrepreneur business world, it just makes a whole lot of sense to me. So I connected with him very, very early. And I go back to him a lot because I just think what he says makes sense. So yeah, it has had a huge impact on me. I think about it all the time. I've written letters to my future self. I do the exercises that he talks about. I think his other books are great too. I've recommended it to a lot of people. So yeah, it's had a huge impact. And I think, honestly, I think every business owner should listen to it or read it.
As I mentioned, I'm coming up with some goals right now for 2025. So I'm definitely going to use this framework to, I'll come up with my SMART goals, and then I was going to come up with an action plan. But on top of that, what I'm thinking I need to do is I need to come up with a habit plan. What habits do I need to have in order to achieve these goals? And some of them may be very simple. Like I want to start improving my speaker reel. So one of the habits will just be to get to the event a little bit earlier, to set up my tripod and buy one of those little clickers to, turn the recorder on and off as I see fit. But these little things, these little switches that allow me to capture that to make the reel that I want to make are going to have such a big impact. And they're so small that they're not really going to have like a big impact on everything that I'm doing. So thank you again so much for coming on today. And I'd like to always end with a fun fact from our speakers. So if you could share a fun or unique fact about yourself, what would that be?
So I was thinking about this earlier. So I think something that I think people just kind of get a chuckle out of is that I grew up in a super small town, and I moved from the small town after the eighth grade. But I graduated the eighth grade with 9 people in my class, which some people think is kind of funny. So that's fun, small fact about me.
So the teachers definitely knew what everybody was doing in that class.
Everybody knew everybody, and yeah, you couldn't get away with much for sure.
I could not imagine living in, like, I come from a big city. I come from Bogota, and then we moved from like big city to big city. So I could not imagine living in like that little bubble. But then now recently we moved here to Orange in California, and it is that town feel. And the majority of people are locals, which they know each other. People have grown up, they've gone to high school, university, all these things. And I'm like, I wish I'd had some sort of that, because I hop from place to place. But again, thank you. If anybody wants to reach back out to you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
You can always find me on LinkedIn, Brea Woodson on LinkedIn, or on my website, gainretainthrive.com. There's all kinds of marketing freebies on there. I have an upcoming workshop that I'm excited about, and I do those a few times a year. So yeah, gainretainthrive.com or LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. And don't forget to check our next video next week, every Wednesday.